Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual artist talk with Ed Pien. My name is Henry Heng Lu. I'm the executive director and curator of Center A, Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Center A is situated on the unceded territories of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples on which we create, learn, and live. Unceded means that this land was never surrendered, um, relinquished, or handed over in any way. We recognize the indigenous peoples who have been dispossessed from the homelands and territories upon which an institution was built and currently occupies and operates in. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize the city and country's longer history, predating um, uh, predating Confederation, one where indigenous peoples have lived since time immemorial. And we encourage you to reflect on the history of the land that you're watching or streaming this online program from, and also the land's caretakers and stewards. Located in Vancouver's Chinatown, Center A also acknowledges and recognizes the complex and multi-layered experiences of the individuals and communities who have lived, built, and contributed to the vibrancy of this historic neighborhood, and those who continue to do so today. We are honored to have the opportunity to work on the land, but also be part of the community and continue to support the people who lived and work here. Center A is the only public art gallery in Canada dedicated to contemporary Asian and Asian diasporic perspectives since 1999. We're committed to providing a platform for engaging diverse communities through public access to the arts, creating mentorship opportunities for artists and arts professionals, and stimulating critical dialogue through exhibitions and public programs that complicate understandings of migrant experiences in diasporic communities. And for today's talk with Ed, Ed is currently showing at Center A with the exhibition Tracing Water, which it includes a large assembly of works by Ed, and engaging different mediums, and then using water as a medium, but also a collaborative force, and also how water is incorporated in some of these different formats of drawing, painting, and also in the formats of video, photography, and mark making. We would like to acknowledge the support of the Daily Lamb Center at the Simon Fraser University, and also the historic Joy Kagawa House for the realization of this exhibition from August 15 to September 30th. Ed and Ed's partner Johannes were the artists and writers in residence at the Kagawa House, and over there they were able to make a few new works for the exhibition at Center A. Center A also would like to acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts and the British Columbia Arts Council and the government of BC, the City of Vancouver, and all of our funders, donors, programming partners, and Center A members. And I would like to introduce Ed to everybody. If you haven't seen the show and then be able to see it, and today is a wonderful opportunity to see some of the documentation of the show, and then to hear Ed talk about his practice and some of the processes for making these works. So Ed Pien is a Canadian artist based in Toronto. He has been making art for nearly 40 years. He divides his time between Toronto and Havana. Ed has shown extensively both nationally and internationally in venues that include the Drawing Center in New York City, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Canadian Cultural Center in Paris, the Goethe Institute in Berlin, the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal, and also the Museum of Contemporary Art, Songzhuang Art Center in Beijing, and also the National Gallery of Canada. He has participated in the 2000 and 2002 Montreal biennials, the 18th edition of the Sydney Biennial, O Canada, at Mouse Mocha, and also presented works at the 5th edition of the Moscow Biennial and the Beijing International Art Biennial, and other biennials in Brazil and then Paraguay. His projects in the forms of photography, photographs, videos, and installation involving a group of Cuban elders exploring the notion of time is currently presented at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto until June 2023. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ed, and Ed will talk about some of the works in tracing water, and also sort of how his collaboration with water started throughout the years. And then also some housekeeping stuff. There is captioning for this talk. If you look to the bottom of your screen, there's live transcript. You can either choose show subtitle or view full transcript for accessibility. And also after Ed's presentation, and we will have a Q&A session and a conversation between me and Ed, and you are encouraged to put your questions in the Q&A. And if the function is too difficult to navigate, feel free to also use the chat function. Okay, so without further ado, I feel I have said enough. Let's welcome Ed. Hi.
Hey.
Yay.
Hello, Henry. Thank you so much for your fine introduction. And I would like to thank Center A for giving me the opportunity to present my exhibition. Henry and all the supporting staff, they're wonderful. And also a big thanks to Anne-Marie Mitten and the historic Joy Kagawa House for providing me the opportunity to take on the residency for 6 weeks to further explore what it means to talk about the sentience of water. And it's been a really fulfilling time, spending time in the house, working, reading, and writing, posting Instagrams with my partner, Johanna Zitz. It's, I guess it's a sense that water has been a subject matter that I have been exploring for a long time, since the mid-'80s, in fact. But at that time, it was more about pollution and the environment, mostly because when I was younger, I used to camp a lot. And I used to go to lakes and kayak and canoe. And at a certain time in our history, there was this, the idea of acid rain. And I was really thinking about the lakes that I had been working on in terms of how clear they are, and realizing that sometimes the clearer the lake, the more dead it is. So I began to work on a series of paintings that dealt with aquatic life that's not there. So literally the absence of life. In the mid-'80s, I was invited to go to Winnipeg for a show, and I decided to go there empty-handed. I had a glass tank on top of my car, and I had hundreds and hundreds of baggies with me. So when I was driving from Toronto to Winnipeg, every time I crossed a body of water, or I came across some kind of stream or rivulet or a pond puddle, I would stop and I would pick up some water, and they would be marked in terms of the kilometers from the destination, location as well. So when I got to Winnipeg, for the show, I mounted all the bags of water showing the different colors. And for me, it was a celebration of the liveliness of water, in that many of the waters are dark brown, knowing that they are full of organic matter, they're living and thriving. And the tank on top of the water, tank on top of the car, I filled with Lake Winnipeg. and I dyed it blue because in the traditional sense of our understanding of water, especially in its representation, we tend to use blue as the color that suggests water. So there says a large tank filled with blue water, and that was my version of a watercolor using real water. So what it means to talk about the sentience of water. For us, sentience pertains to humans and animals and insects and things that are considered alive. But there are different ways of thinking about liveliness, and there are different ways of thinking about sentience that is not about in terms of human understandings of it. So I was quite taken, and my foundation of what I know has been turned through reading a wonderful book by, actually I have it here, I think you can't see it, but it's called Material Eco-Criticism. Oh, it's blurred, sorry. And it's by Cirinella Iovino and Serpil Obermann. And they're editors to this amazing book that talks about the liveliness of water and the creativity that it has. And all of this came about through my understanding of this 2012 groundbreaking trial with the Kichwa people of Sarakuyu. They're indigenous to the Ecuadorian Amazon, and they fought against deforestation. And the fight continues to this day. In fact, recently I met Flavio, a shaman from Ecuador in the Amazons, and he's in Vancouver right now trying to gain support and financial support, especially to buy up tracts of land so that they can never be sowed and deforested. So their cosmology is based on the forest as a living and sentient being. And there, in recent years, there have been many, many books on this subject matter. So the sentient world is a world that is alive, that's more alive than we can understand and we can know. And in this world is full of materials. We comprise materials as well. And every material has a story of life. It comes from somewhere. And according to David Abram, in Becoming Animal, he says, we are so close to a tree, we're so close to a rock because we share the same origin, we share the same air, the same water, the same heat. So it's closer than we think in terms of our relationship to each other. And in the eco-material criticism theory, they call these expressiveness as non-human expressive presences. And it's about connectivity, diversity, differences in relationalities, which are already important because in this world, it is about relationships. It's, in fact, in the indigenous cosmology, it is about relationships. Everything is related to each other. And in terms of water, when I think about water, I'm thinking also about its ability to do things. But when it does things, it's always in a very co-agentic situation. So it has co-agency in the same way that the way I talk about it is that we are also part of water. So through the makeup of ourselves, which is material, and through water, through this agency of co-agentic relationships, we become who we are. So to think about water as having sentience may be still difficult, but all I can say is that the relationship between us and water is so intimate that we're so imbricated in this liveliness that to take away one, the other one doesn't exist in the sense that we cannot live without water. The other day I was actually thinking, if I ate something that is completely dry without any water in it, I couldn't even swallow it. So water is always there, but we always take it for granted. And in the book Undercurrent, which is co-edited by Rita Wong, Lee Miracle actually talks about water in the sense that we should be humble to water. And it's something that I need to think more of, to be thankful and to be diminutive in front of it, before it, because it is something that's greater than us and it makes everything possible in our world. So in terms of creativity, which is really interesting, and this is where I come in as an artist, because I and working or collaborating with water to create most of the works that are presented at the Center 8 exhibition. And creativity, some may think it's not possible. How can water be creative? Well, if you think about it, without the materials, the matters in this world to be creative, we will never be here. It is through trial and error, through different kinds of combinations and recombinations, failures and successes, that living beings came into existence. And through their ability to be creative, we are actually here at this moment in time. And so interacting as well, in the sense that they're always working with other materials to create conditions that allows forces, allow lives and moments to be shared and to actually happen. So this is me collecting water. What is really interesting is because of highways and man-built structures, rivers and ponds sometimes are really hard to access. Here I had to climb a fence to go underneath a bridge, and then through barbed wires to actually get to the Sumas Lake to get some water that's in Abbotsford. Anyway, so collecting water is an ongoing project for me, but in terms of just dealing with the sentience of water, I also have to change my language. So it is no longer a thing about collecting. It's something about gathering or kidnapping water for my collaborative projects. So while I joined Kagam House, I was thinking how I can actually impress upon people the idea of water having sentience. So because it's a writer's workshop, I thought, okay, so maybe I'll use some words, because if I can find commonalities in words that we use to both describe humans and water, it's part of a starting point to make things that are relatable for us to think about water and human beings. So for instance, I started with sounds, and I said there are sounds that water make, that people make, including words like gurgling, hissing, roaring, wailing, and then I went into action words, which are words such as beguiling, which water can be. It could be mystifying, as can a human being. It could be enlightening. It could be threatening, and also it could be nurturing. So these words also apply both to humans and water. And then I was using words that describe characters and moods as well, such as ephemeral, sensual, spirited, moody, unpredictable. So for the show, I also wanted to not show work in the traditional sense for myself anyway. It was not a survey show of what I've done. It was more about putting works together that I haven't put together to get a sense of where I have come from. It's really about assessing where I can go to continue my exploration on the sentience of water. So even though I began my project in the mid-80s, I don't have any images of that because they're all in slide form, and I just never had a chance to actually translate the slides into digital data. But what I can show you from the exhibition, which is the earliest work, is a series called Two Worlds. Two Worlds comprise, it's a fiction, literally. It's a world that I imagined as having, containing two different beings, water-based being and a land-based being, and they fight because of their differences. So because they fight and fight and fight, and no one's really winning over time, over centuries of fighting, they beget hybrids, children that are born from intermingling of the two different creatures. So at the end, the war had to end because all the beings are now completely mixed, and you can't distinguish one side from the other side. And this work was inspired by a residency I had done in Amsterdam in 99, sorry. And so literally when I go to a different city, I tend to go to the historic museums to get a sense of how that country or that city has come to being. In most of the museums that I went to, there are just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings of sea battles, and that's where this inspiration came from. And so these are my watery creatures, and these are some of the hybridized features. Incidentally, the reason I'm interested in this is because it relates to the other kinds of drawings that I do. I usually make monstrous and grotesque figures or ghostly figures to explore the sense of other, because for me, it's a celebration of differences. And in this world, when you look at them and you say, why is it that this figure has 3 legs? And they will ask you, why is it that you have only 2 legs? So it's a way of kind of suggesting that what constitutes normal is from our point of view and not from their point of view. In fact, there's a very famous writer, Guopu, from the year 200. He actually, in the huge book called The Mountains and Seas Classics, there are a whole bunch of different creatures in there. He said, a thing in itself is not strange, it is I who makes it strange. So for the show, it was realized in Amsterdam at W139, I actually made a huge mural out of my small drawings. And literally these are done with panels of paper, they're translucent. So one layer is seen through the other one. So here there's like, I see it as almost like a moment of a battle between the 2 worlds. For the Sydney Biennale in 2012, I was invited by Jerome McMaster and also Catherine de Zegger. And the theme on that Biennale was water. So I had the opportunity to go up to Dawson City. I interviewed an elder there, Percy Henry, and he was giving me stories of contaminated water and how many indigenous people who live really close to the land would suffer because they take water directly from the streams, and that the fish, ones that were robust and firm, are now soft due to gold mining, in fact. So I did a piece that plays with the idea of me caring and also kind of disturbing the animals, the sea creatures. And so at a moment in time, I would kind of take them off so they're no longer floating. And then you see the whole installation as this kind of deserted space. There's sand on the ground. There's an absence of water. Everything's very ghostly, playing with projections and shadows to create this really, in a way, beautiful yet very desolate environment. So while I was working on this project, I heard an amazing interview with Marilyn Asfair on the CBC radio, and she was talking about how if the source of the water is denied, and then the people who are downstream can never access the water, or if the source has been contaminated or polluted, the people downstream will suffer. So I actually contacted her and asked her to, if I had the permission to use her book as a starting point to make an artwork. So literally what I did was I marked each of the words, each letter literally is 1 inch in length, and the blank space is a white space. And I marked and charted all the words so they are literally translated into a rope piece. So you can see here, all the texts are in black. It's like they're all being redacted, and all the white are the spaces between words, and they're hung as an installation. So literally, you can walk through this book. So literally, simultaneously, I'm showing you this book, and I'm also taking away the content of this book. Because in most instances, even if we know about the situation with indigenous people who have lack of access to clean water, we are kind of just not doing as much as we could. So I actually had asked Meryl Ann to collaborate several times in my water-based projects, and for a large paper cut that was shown at the AGO about really contaminated lake waters, I asked Meryl Ann to write her notes as if everything had been resolved. So this is a future perfect way of thinking. So these are also aspirational thinking, and to read these texts is a way to also think about why hasn't all of these things become reality. So here she asserts and insists that all governments and citizens in Canada agree that water cannot be owned. Keeping promises high, promises the high and sacred honor that the Canadian government consistently fulfills, which is false. And what is false as well as that ecosystems are healthy and support the full expression of Indigenous land and water rights. So all of these are aspirational, and some people are working on it as we speak to make sure that it happens in the future. So the idea is like it should happen, and why hasn't it not happened at this moment? So this is a paper cut I did using 3M reflector film. And so literally all the patterns are valences of poison. So there's arsenic in the water, there's sulfur dioxide, things that are just completely contaminated. The fish here are fish that I had captured on the website of people holding dead fish that they caught. So if you know how they hold a fish, the bellies are always distended downward. So all the fish in this particular image are already dead. And then there are these mixed hybridized creatures of figures from human and sea creatures or water creatures. In 2016, I was invited to make a piece for about water again. I was invited to make a piece about water at the Lethbridge University Art Gallery. Josephine Mills is a curator. She had paired me up with a hydrologist. And so it was really fun to actually try to explore something that I would consider using live water as a starting point for this exhibition. So I actually designed a system where water would go through a series of sieves or containers. They would just pass on and on downward to a basin, and then it's pumped back up. So the idea is that there will be enough water in this basin to start. That will be the amount of water that I would drink over the course of the show. And over the course of the exhibition, the water would escape as it runs down these trays, and they would just then eventually, as the show was nearing its end, water would start to dry up in the container. So I had to get one of my ex-students to do a 3D imaging so that we can actually build this thing in actual space. It was really complicated to figure out because everything had to work so that water doesn't flow backwards. It would always move forward and not stall and puddle and pool and spill. So this is a detail of the water running down. And it's quite beautiful, in fact, because it makes these beautiful, lovely, soft sounds as it splatters onto one of the receiving plates. So that's a show. There's a video projector on the ceiling, and it projects the image of all the transparent plates onto the floor. And you can see actually the shadows of the water running in the video projection. The video projection is a ink drawing that I made, and I played it backwards, so it's actually evaporating or escaping. So the image is always moving around because the marks are kind of disappearing and appearing. And on the wall is another text by Neil Anna's Fair, and also a CGI video of water going up and down. There's a video of it, I'll show you that. So this is a CGI made by James Graham, who's a teacher at professor at Lethbridge University. So it's a good place. It was impossible for me to videotape water as if I'm in an aquarium that is also rising and falling. I really wanted the sense that we would be submerged under the water. So the only way was to make a CGI to approximate what I wanted. So James's video is projected onto Neil Ann's text, which is the same text I'm using for the Center A show, which I'll show you in a few minutes. So let's go to that. So literally, oh, okay. So I'm going to first show you a video documentation of the show, so you have a better sense of the show. So there's another video in it that's a different piece. I didn't want to show you that anyway. So I also, when I'm working with water, I feel water is always political, and I don't even have to spell it out, but it just is. And water becomes even more political depending on where I actually have captured it. This water is from the Kainai Reserve, just south of Lethbridge, and the water has been gifted to me by an indigenous elder. Her name is Mary Fox. So on her reserve, the water is not drinkable, and I decided to use it as the starting point for a drawing. So the captured water was poured onto this huge sheet of Tyvek, and I splattered ink onto it, and I pushed ink around with my feet, and literally I left it for 7 days, and during those 7 days, water made a very, very, very slow escape from the surface of the Tyvek, and as it was leaving, it left these beautiful marks and increments of lines, and literally this is a drawing. So in terms of collaborating with water, I feel I need to initiate the process, but I have to create a condition where water takes part in a way that is not about me always controlling. So the difficulty is, as an artist, how to forfeit with total control, allowing something else to collaborate, in this case, water. And in around 2017, I think, I was invited by NASCAD to work on the lithograph. And so Halifax is right on the ocean, and I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to actually use ocean water as part of a collaborating force. So I collected or kidnapped seawater, and I poured it onto a mylar, waiting for it to escape, leaving its residual, leaving its ghostly drawing behind, and it did. So here, as water escapes, it leaves all the salt, all the minerals, anything that was in the ocean at the time that I had captured it, as these materials that are the residuals and the traces. And this image appeared, which to me, I was very thankful, because it was so much like a figure. It's so consistent with what I do, but these are all salt crystals and minerals. What was interesting is, after 7 days of water escaping and leaving its residuals and its marks, its drawing, it rained. And that day when it rained, I went to the studio, and this image disappeared, literally. It was submerged under water. Literally, water came back and collaborated with salt. And then I had to chase water away. I was quite angry because my time at the residency was very short, so I chased the water away with a hairdryer. So that's the work. So we scanned the image and had it printed. And while there, I also used the ocean water to make a series of work that's in the Century exhibition, and it's called Ocean Water Drawing. So literally, the word drawing is used both as a noun and as a verb. So what I do is I would allow water to soak up the whole paper, or the paper would be soaked up completely with ocean water. And then I would do something minimal. Like here, I would put white ink on a piece of clear mylar, and I would let it drip onto the paper and see what happens when water mixes with it. And sometimes I would just gently move it around, move the ink around so that it activates more of the area where water is kind of playing. And so this one just literally using a brush and splattering white ink onto the surface. And then it made these beautiful marks. It reminded me of a cave, a universe, lights that are descending. So I went in there with white Conte and white ink to embellish some of the details to give it my response to what water had done. Literally, this one came without me doing much except for scraping the ink away from the surface. And you can see the bloom in the background. That's from the salt interacting with the ink. And this one is using a hairdryer and just pushing water here and there until it did a speedy escape. And this one, I added more to it because I just felt the marks that were left behind were so beautiful. It seemed like a universe. So I started to embellish it with little stars and planets and shooting stars. So that's the first room at center A. And so you saw the work on the wall on top, on the left, and the wall to the right. On the lower shelves, there are these Mylar drawings. And the reason I place them there is because they're done on 3M reflective film. And you need to have light going through directly your line of sight and bouncing back to your line of sight. So they create this beautiful reflective luminous quality. So this is one of them, and they're called Diane's codfish water drawings. So a friend of mine was cooking cod for meal one day, and she had to soak the cod, and I asked her to save the cod water for me. And based on that water, I made a whole series of works. But because there's so much salt content in the water, and when water finally disappeared, the salt was pretty brittle. It seemed to be non-fixed. So I decided to mimic what water had done. So I sprinkled beautiful glitter and little jewels on top of the surface to make my mark in response to what water was able to do. So, if you ask me to make a drawing like what water has done, I can never do it. So in this case, I'm able to only respond to minimally, literally what it has done, because it just has made this beautiful work. In 2016, I think I was also invited to participate in a residency in the northern part of Chile, in a desert, the Atacama. It's the driest place on the planet. And it was an incredible trip for myself and my partner. And there's actually salt underground. And so they're actually mined, they're taken up, and they are put into these vats, and they are made to disappear so that only the salt remains. So here there's a pool where the water has almost gone, and the salt would become the solid at the end that they would use to sell.
Okay, let's do it. Do it.
So literally, I'm just collecting the water with salt in it. And because the water is so charged with salt, when I finally made a collaboration with it, when I put ink onto the surface, the ink exploded or just danced, like fizzled on the surface, skipped on the surface of the paper, and until the action had dissipated. And so I literally just dropped ink up to the surface, and the salty water did its own thing. The resulting work are these three marked up pieces of paper. what I like about these three works is that there's so much salt on the paper that the whole paper is luminous because of the way light refracts on these crystals. And that's part of the show on the second floor, which is a bigger space. And I don't know how much time we have to. Okay. In preparation for coming to Center 8, I made a large drawing, and it's on the left side, and it's called, what's it called now? It's called Runoffs. So it's done on a large Tyvek, and literally what I did, so first the water is from the Paraguay River. Earlier, when I talked about the sentience water, I also talked about the story life of matter and the story life of water. So the Paraguay River is interesting that it runs through 4 countries: Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. So over the course of its flow, it has no border. It doesn't understand border. In fact, water doesn't even understand that we call lakes and oceans and streams and puddles, because it is just everywhere. There's always humidity in the air, so it just is in different degrees. To use words to describe water fails short, and also in a way, matter is constituted by language, and language constitutes matter, but I feel it's never adequate to actually give water a name. It's a matter, it's a material, it's also a phenomenon. And the two are so integrated, and it's so integrated with us, that to begin to take it apart feels like you're trying to find the soul, but the whole thing is itself. So in Paraguay, I feel the water is more contaminated. There's still people swimming in it, and I just didn't even want to go near it, but I gathered some of the water to make this drawing. And I wanted to use fluorescent orange to suggest the sense of danger that this water is highly polluted. And the way I made this drawing is that I wrinkled the paper, the Tyvek, so that it formed literally little mountains and little valleys and recesses. So once that's done as a sculpture, I poured water on the ridges of this Tyvek, and water would run downhill to create this work. So literally, this is a work in progress. You can see here, it looks truly like a landscape. So once it dried, I would flatten it, and then it's shown in its present form. So over the course of this took about 4 days for water to actually leave. And so the darker sections are the recesses where water really lingered for a long time. So more of the pigments actually stayed and collected. And so you can see here that peaks, some areas have no water because water likes to run downhill. Water is subject to gravity the same way we are subject to gravity. And so that's one force that I can kind of predict and can work with. And I really wanted to use live water in the show. So every day, Diane and her team have to go and put more water onto the surface. There are 2 cases, and literally water is there, then it kind of decides to leave, but it always is leaving residuals. One is the Fraser River. It also has a very storied life. It comes from the, literally the source is Mount Robson in Jasper, and it travels through around 1,400 kilometers. As it goes, it gathers materials, it experiences different situations, then it comes to the mouth of the Fraser. That's where I had gathered the water. And this one is done at the historic Joy Kagawa House, in fact. So I was really happy because one day during my residency, it actually rained. So I took a Tyvek outside and let the rain do its thing, and it was creating pools and rivulets. All I did was I poured water into the pools, and then it made this drawing for me. I have to acknowledge Giuseppe Pennoni because in the 80s, I saw a show at the National Art Gallery, and it was quite amazing because, well, first of all, this piece is called To Be a River. And Pennoni at that time already was maybe thinking about or indirectly thinking about the sentience of water. So literally, he thought water or the river is the greatest sculpture in the world. And he wanted to learn from the river and become its apprentice. So what he did was he took a boulder that had been sculpted by a river and he copied it. So the two are almost identical, not quite, but you can't really tell which one is the original, which makes it much more fascinating. So here I just want to acknowledge Giuseppe Pennoni's work, which is still one of my favorite works that exists. In 2012, 2013, when I was up north working on my research on water in Dawson City, I was also trying to make art, which was nearly impossible because at the time, the outside temperature was minus 45 degrees. And the only thing I thought I could do was to take pictures. So I would go out with a flash, and this is actually daylight, but in the wintertime, daytime is pretty dark. And the unfortunate or fortunate thing is every time I tried to take a picture, my breath would be fogging up the entire image. So what I decided to do was to hold my breath and control my breath so that when I blew out, I would be making a drawing based on the water vapor in the space. So it's a very ephemeral, very temporary drawing that's captured using flash and again. I love the play with space as well, because here the space becomes very ambiguous. You can't really tell the scale of the breath anymore. It feels gigantic, or the tree has been dwarfed because of the way the space has been collapsed by the lens of the camera. And it's right up my alley in terms of my interest in ghosts and phantoms and appearances and disappearances. And so these vapors also reminded me of ectoplasm that kind of existed in history during seances. And another series that's in the show is called Suspension. So literally, it's something that I can't see with my eyes, and I can feel the tingliness of these ice crystals that are suspended in the air. So by using the flash and the camera, I was able to capture them. And the light refracts the crystals, giving you the rainbows, the colors, which make them seem so magical. For me, it is about re-enchantment. It is about re-enchanting the unknowable, just enjoying the moment to really celebrate water in its many, many forms. To me, water can be dangerous, but it's also very, very playful. It's always, 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 I would say, nosy. It wants to be in everything. It wants to participate in everything. Excuse me for a second. Sorry, I'm doing Zoom. Sorry, visitors in the back. Sorry. So these are some of the images. They're digital prints. I went to Hawaii one year because I really want to see the flow of the lava and also the residuals of the flow when lava froze, or yeah, it actually froze because the temperature is too low for it to move. And while there, I realized how on the Big Island, it has periods of downpours. And one day we were forced to go into the car, and from the car windshield, sitting in the car, staying dry, I see the landscape change. So here I was able to document it. So literally the image has not been photoshopped. It's a combination of 3 lenses. So the lens of the water, which is always moving, so it's really distorting the image. The lens of the windshield, and also the lens of the camera. With the 3, this image is captured, but also takes the water from our eyes and the lens from our eyes, and also the water inside our eyes to actually see or perceive this work. So literally there are at least 6 layers of lenses working here to create this work called rainforest. And I also made a video of it. I'll just show you a brief clip of it. I don't know about you, but I can watch that for but for me, it's about the liveliness of the world, and it's just so enchanting and mesmerizing. And I'm just very grateful that I was able to capture that moment. And in 2018, I believe, I was in Iceland doing a trek through in between 2 glaciers. And we also traveled to different places. And because I'm always interested in collecting water for future use. So here we went to a bay that's full of iceberg. I can't tell the name right now. It's not working that well from names recall. But it was just beautiful. But also kind of disturbing knowing that the glacier is actually shrinking. All the ice are falling and breaking apart, going into the ocean. And I was able to capture some of the glacier, the ice from the glacier, and I melted them and took them back to Toronto. So they're selling bottles. I'm waiting to find a good way to actually have them help collaborate in the work. If you haven't been to Iceland, I highly recommend it. It should be on everyone's bucket list. It's just incredibly beautiful and humbling because the landscape is so vast. In it, one feels very diminished, but in a good way. So, for instance, the Skoga Falls, that's also in Iceland. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. Standing in front of the falls, you can literally walk into it if you wanted to. The sound is thundering, and literally when you're in front of it, there's no end to it. It felt eternal. I can't describe the experience, but I could stand there forever, but you get soaked. Even with raincoats on, you're completely soaked because water is coming down, but water is everywhere. So this is a text that's on the wall that Meryl Ann had written. I had asked her to write in the position of water. So what would water say to us if it or they could speak? So every time I read it, I just find it much more compelling. It grows on me over time. It's already strong to start with, but it feels like the more I learn about the sentience of water, the more I get from her text. And so she says, I am you within and without, quenching your staggering thirst, gifting my lungs misty breath, and enlivening you in the flowing bones of my body. extending my sentence to forgive me not, child. And so I took this text and I made it into a crystal gem text. They were embedded as individual crystals on the wall. And literally, and then there's a video projection of my, I would say my archive of water images. They are projected onto the crystal gems, and I'll show you the video. But literally, it's an ongoing archive. I'm gathering water to celebrate its differences, its expressiveness, its variety of, I would say expressiveness. So this is just a snippet of it. It actually goes through from water to vapor to ice to frost on the pane of our window. So here you'll see the glittering of the. Okay. So I think I'm finished with my talk, but what I want to say is in my work, I tend to not to be political, but I think the politics come through based on the kind of work that I do. At a time of what we call the environmental crisis, I feel we need to be much more responsive and create not a divide, but a consolidation with everything in the world, to be mindful of everything, to be respectful of everything, to be thankful of everything, to understand that everything is about relationships. And in this work, I'm trying to be playful, to find the poetic, to find the enchantments, and to really to honor water in all its forms and all its beauty. Okay. Voila.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was fantastic. Sorry. That was fantastic. It was such a journey to kind of hear you. I mean, it's such a journey to look at how sort of first started, and then sort of different experiments with water in the works, and these collaborations with water throughout the years. And then for us at Center A, we feel that we're really honored to be able to present sort of a survey of the works on water by you. And I think that I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your time in Vancouver, because of the residency, and also you lived in Vancouver before, and then I think that perhaps the perception of the environment changed over the years, and then and different interests, and then in making the work. Sorry if that's too vague, but
no, understand. So yeah, so Vancouver was great. I think partly is mostly actually, in fact, is based on the fact that we were attending a residency. So it felt like within the time, so the time is limited, it's 6 weeks. So within that time, we had to do things. We had to be serious. Unlike my practice of water, because I have so many different practices that it comes in and out as I move from project to project. But here, I feel I had the 6 weeks to really focus on using actually words to articulate things, in something that's really not articulable. I don't know if that makes sense, but because we were using Instagram, and so we were trying to figure out the best way to use language that really expresses the sentience of water, and to really rethink the use of language so that it's not always falling into the dominant, society's ideas of what material, what water, things that are not human are. So it is about respect. It is about trying to really being careful with what I say so that water is always foregrounded in its making, in its collaboration with me in the drawings and in the artworks that it's doing. So we also had ample opportunity to experience water in many locations because Vancouver is right by the ocean. It has many rivers. It has amazing catch basins. It has all these reservoirs. We did some reservoir walks as well. And Vancouver is very fortunate. Unlike many countries, many areas where there's a starvation of water, lack of water, Vancouver has excess of water. Maybe not in the summertime, but the reservoirs hold so much that it could live through entire summer without rain. And literally when it does rain, the reservoirs are big enough to hold only 1/9 of what precipitation actually falls into the reservoirs from all the catch basins. So, and it's very clean, very safe water. And it's actually quite amazing to understand how that if those catch basins weren't there, what happens. And in many places, their catch basins are pretty empty. And I've done research as well on sources of water. And in China, for instance, water comes from ice, melting ice and glaciers. And once those glaciers are gone, water will be pretty scarce. And many countries use water as a form of political, I would say, bullying with other countries. If they have the source, they withhold the water or reduce the flow downstream. So people downstream are always suffering and they're at the mercy of other countries. Yeah, so literally it was a time to really focus, to really think and try to think about what to make. I can't make as fast as I want to because I really have to think about how there is a condition that would arise to allow this possibility of collaboration to happen. And it's ongoing, obviously. And I wish I can make it full time, but I can't because I have other practices that are also very urgent. But I feel I've done some groundbreaking work for myself in this particular residency. And I have ideas to go forward with other forms of collaboration with water.
And also, we would love to maybe a little bit later we can talk about what you've been working on, especially the Cuban project. But I think that from my observations or my senses, I feel that I sense this kind of there's this sense of trust from you in water, in making the work. There is something quite intuitive, but also there is this trust, and then to let water sort of speak its own language and development and move and create movements, and then you I guess I would say sort of did these interventions, and then for example, dropping the ink into the water. So some of these gestures. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more about this kind of, to me, I think it's kind of like an intuitive process and just trusting in water and see how it goes and creating these compositions. Does it always work, or is there a time that you have to go through certain process to, yeah.
Right. So the process, I'm hoping I'm not repeating myself because I could go on and just use, ask water to just soak up the paper as much as it can and then do something. So the idea is thinking about how water behaves, what it would do, and then use that as a strategy to collaborate. So literally I'm latching on to what it does and just allowing itself to show its own forces, its own abilities, and then adding some marks to so that it articulates itself. So, for instance, if I put the Tyvek out there and it just had rain on it, when rainwater finally disappears, there will be hardly any residuals. So I had to intervene. I mean, when water comes down as rain, it's always acidified. So it does something already. That's why the landscape changes. The rain that comes down becomes a coagentic force that disturbs the soil, breaks down the rocks because of all the ions and anions that are in the air that rain water actually picks up and distributes. And so in that way, water is always working. It's always collaborating, creating changes, creating manipulating situations. So the idea is for me to really think about what water can do and take advantage of those moments and make something happen. That's visual, that's visible for the audience to see and for me to see.
Speaking of which, we have, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So I never use the word trusting water. I think in a way, I know it's always there and it's reliable, at least from where I live. But when I go to Cuba, for instance, it may not be there. There's a shortage of water. Water is sent to your house once every 2 days, and then it's in a big container. So you have to be really very mindful of how you use that water up. So I've always saved. My mother saves water like it's gonna be the end of the world tomorrow. She doesn't waste any water. I think that comes from a wartime mentality as well. I took on some of that in terms of not wasting water. I just feel it's a precious resource, even though we have plenty of it here in this part of the world. It's lacking everywhere else. And I'm even more so humble to water when I'm in, and thankful and grateful to water when I'm in Havana, for instance.
Thank you. Speaking of which, we have some questions in the Q&A. I think that it's a good time to ask some of those.
Thank you for posting the questions.
Thank you. There is an anonymous attendee. Thank you for sharing your ideas behind the selection of your work. Do you feel that your relationship with your own work and collaborator water influences how you look at your own life? I guess the question is trying to ask that, the way that you interacts and it collaborates water, and then that might have some philosophical impacts on your own living.
Sure, I definitely think as I grow older, how I am not self-sufficient, that I'm always relying on other people. It's a shared community that I need to embrace, especially in Cuba, for instance. All the neighbors are so kind and generous to each other, even though they have hardly any resources. I feel collaboration is important, maintaining communication is important, and to just be generous, and to also be generous in receiving, because the give and take is shouldn't be one-sided. What I've learned is to still, I guess as an artist, and having done art for so long, what I'm learning and always learning is that I need to remain open and remain to be almost childlike, to have this sense of curiosity and wonder to move me forward. And I'm always very excited when I'm making work, because the end result is always unknown, a mystery until I get there. So I am just very grateful and thankful that I am making art, and I continue to make art, and I continue to make art that I feel excite me, and I can keep going for a long time. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you. There is perhaps a good question following up on that. The question is, with someone who has been making art for several decades, what strategies do you use to remain so playful yet philosophical in your processes?
Okay, so good question. Playful. I think maybe this is where the trust comes in. You have to trust in yourself, and do not be afraid of making mistakes, because sometimes what moves me forward are the unexpected accidents and mistakes. Because if you think you want to do something and you move towards that goal, and you do it, it's not as exciting as going through part ways and then something happens and you follow that other line of inquiry and then it takes you to somewhere completely different and exciting. So that's what I think keeps me going. So something that keeps me going is trying to make as much work as you can, because that will take you to different places. But also, I think research is important, thinking about the work. And I'm not a good writer, but I think writing is really important as well, to really articulate your thoughts and to put them into some kind of like a placeholder so you can go back and think about what you've written to further your own work. I never write to defend my work. I feel when I'm writing, I'm kind of contextualizing and kind of putting my thought onto paper to be able to actually see my thoughts. So yeah, so to remain philosophical, I feel it's a responsibility. To make art just for the sake of art making feels a bit shallow and not so fulfilling for myself personally. So I feel I always have to take something and make it even more meaningful than when I first started.
And there is a process of growth and renewal in that. So thank you for that. And then I'm not sure how to try to understand this next question. Your work could be interpreted as being about the fantastical. Do you mean fantastical and sentimental way of looking at the work? Can you speak more about that?
Definitely could be fantastical, because for people who don't understand or who don't appreciate or can't accept the fact that water could be sentient, it's fantastical. And I'm not sure if sentimental is something that I would think about when I look at my own work. Sentimental for me would be making something that's really idealistic, something that stirs the heart in a way that's kind of romantic, and I would say maybe a little bit let's see what I'm trying to look for. Prescribed. I feel sentimentality isn't part of what I'm interested in. So for instance, working with water, creating conditions where it speaks and it does its own way of making and collaborating with me, I don't see this room for sentimentality. Maybe you can, the person who posed the question could give me some examples of where you feel the work is sentimental, and I can speak to that.
Okay, we will see. It's also from Animus. Why everybody's Animus? Anonymous. And there are questions about the project in Havana. I know it's not sort of related to the exhibition at Santé, but I would love to ask Ed about it shortly. There's a question. Thank you, Ed. Could you share a Thank you, Ed. Could you share a specific direction or inspiration you have had since seeing the selected works for the Century A exhibition?
Yes, I don't know how to articulate this, but okay, so one thing that's really different between us and matter or rocks and water and trees and all that is that we experience time very differently. So for instance, if you were to see water sped up, we would perceive it very differently than the way we see it now in our time through our eyes. The good example would be, let's say a tree lives to 1,000 years old. If we were to walk in front of it, we would be seen as a specter. We would be a ghost. For rock, we don't even register because we go by so quickly. So there's always this battle between temporalities and just the pace of speed that's so different. And God, can you just repeat the question again? No, I'll just think about it again.
Oh, could you share a specific direction or inspiration you have had since seeing the selected works for the Century show?
You're right. So the idea of time is really important, and it's something that I would like to experiment more in terms of working collaboratively with water. It does this thing on its own time based on the atmospheric conditions. So I actually have devised a way, but I haven't started yet, to make to allow or to have water make marks that I can actually control in increments. I don't know how to say this without giving it away because I haven't done yet, so I can't really just say this is exactly what it is. And I also want to do more art that's performative with water because I feel water is a process, it's always performing. So how is it that I can actually participate in its performance to realize artwork? So maybe some of the artworks will not be two-dimensional on Tyvek, maybe more will be time-based, for instance, so that it's an interaction that's temporary and it kind of comes and goes depending on the condition that exists when it rises in terms of making the work. So even with this image that you see here with water, I call this a watery dress because I just feel when I'm in the water and the water's kind of enveloping me as a wave, it creates this beautiful lace-like dress. So that's kind of like a performance that I would like to consider in the future as ways of collaborating with water. Yeah, more performative actions, I think.
And then there's a question, I think it's a good follow-up. Do ideas of abstraction and or realism come into your thinking when you're doing your work with water? To me, it seems water might be either or both. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting to think about abstraction and realism because there are different takes. In a way, the drawing with the rain is real. It's more real than the representation of raindrops because they are just representations. Here, the realism is the fact that water has made the work. So it's more real than a mimetic image of water. I always say that if you make a representation, like for instance, I can't remember her name, the Portuguese artist who does waves. Yeah, I can't remember her name, sorry, but she makes these beautiful wave drawings, but to me, they're dead because she's captured them in one moment and they look more sculptural in a way. So whereas I'm trying to use the liveliness of water and the forces of water to actually make the work. So the reality of its forces makes the work to me even more real than a representation of water.
And we also have the follow-up on the previous question about sentimental. So whoever asked, the anonymous attendee said, maybe a sense of accepting wonderment from the natural world, specifically water as a collaborator along with the images that look otherworldly, made me use the word sentimental. The processes are very real. The images are fantastical. Thank you for the talk and answering the question.
Okay, so thank you for that. And so I guess when I'm embracing the unknown, sentimental doesn't go into my conscience in the sense that for me, sentimental is recalling a past, recalling an experience, recalling a feeling, and trying to bring it to the forefront. Whereas if I'm engaging with water in ways that are unknown to me, it surely cannot be sentimental in the same way. So I would say, what would be a good word to describe my relationship with water? You know, playful, being in the moment, embracing all its wonderments would be words I use to describe my engagement with water. And also unexpected, because you never know how water will fully respond to my project. So I would say wonderment is and surprise, delightfulness, those words.
Thank you. And there's some question about Havana. I think people are curious, but I do have another question before we move on to the other round of things. Is that so because Ed, like you said, you have your practice really, it's quite expensive, and it has the different projects you're working on. For example, there's the projects with the elders, but then there is the projects on water, and then there's these ghostly, otherworldly images, drawings that you make. I wonder, when you are sort of working in different arenas, do you find this kind of unknownness? Maybe that's not sort of exciting, and then there's this kind of unknown that's ahead, and then you the way that you approach it, that you find exciting, and also part of that journey. I don't know if that's like a question.
Well, I definitely embrace the unknown. I definitely embrace accidents. I've learned so much from my accidents and mistakes. I feel they truly teach me a lot. And literally, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer. He has end results that he's working towards. Literally, I have a starting point, and I don't know what the end result is. The end result may end in 1 point or 2 points or several points. It may take me back to the beginning. It may take me back to my past. I feel unless I start, I don't even know where it goes to until I finish. But the finishing is also not a word that I like to use. I feel everything's a process. So that, for instance, in my drawings with the monstrous and the grotesque and the ghostly, I always say that I never finish the drawing. If I were to stop, it's because of different conditions. But if I were to see the drawings again over time, I would have changed. So the drawing surely will want to change along with me. So it's literally, it's not about finishing, it's about stopping and then hoping maybe someday I'll pick up the thread where I left off. Because it's, for me, everything's a process. So to end something in a way means the death of something. And I just see always opportunities to intervene, to move forward, to express something that's about the present, and to make changes so that it does express that present.
Definitely, knowing your work for so long, I definitely think that there is this kind of openness, and then sort of without finding sort of the end result, and then there's this it's truly really an ongoing kind of process. And then I do think that even, for example, there are works that you show me, and then you revisit it. It's like, maybe I would add something here or something like that. We recall those like small moments. Right. And
well, even for the exhibition, I mean, I didn't truly know how everything will fall into place until near the very end. It's like making the work. The exhibition literally is like making the art project. So, and it doesn't disturb me because I've done a lot of work. And I also realize that, you know, we are humans, we can fail, but hopefully you can learn something from that failure or whatever is called failure. I feel there is no failure unless you just stop making, then that's a failure in not even trying. So to start and work on something and it's not going the way you like to, maybe there's something to be learned from that.
And also to me, I think that there seems to be what I find fascinating is definitely this kind of act of morphing, sort of transforming into something else. I do think that there is this consistent morphing into something in your work, and then it's truly ongoing, and then everything seems to makes even more sense when you see them in sequence in a way. Sorry, that's just like my personal take that I really enjoy. What I really enjoy about your work. Yeah. So why don't we move on to the your one of your most recent projects, which is
Sure.
the present. Have to remind me of the name again.
Present,
Past, future.
Yep.
And then there was a question about that actually from the Q&A. What a generous body of work and lecture. My question is, how does your work in Cuba relate to this larger body of work? Do you continue it there in Havana?
Well, thank you for that question. So the most straightforward answer is it's also a collaboration. So I'm collaborating with water, but I'm also collaborating with a small group of elders. And over time, things change, and I have to, you know, respond to the changes in the same way that I respond to water and water respond to my actions. So this back and forth relational way of making is part and parcel with both projects. And I'm very excited about that because I'm not the sole facilitator of or the initiator or the controller of the situation. Things happen and I have to respond, and I love that because it makes me feel like I have to be alert, I have to be open, and I have to be always receptive to what's happening so that I can move forward. And there are elements, and there are elements in terms of material, in some of the strategies that I use for both projects, and they come from a different project, which is based on my research in trauma. So I like the fact that one body of work will have materials and processes that are relevant to other fields of work that I'm embarking on. So an example is the crystal gems. I've used them in other projects as well, and for different reasons. But in this case, I really want the shimmering of the crystals to suggest the shimmering of the surface of the water.
And also about Havana, because earlier you talked about sort of how time is very important to you in your explorations and also making the work. So I think that sort of that could be tied back to your Havana project and how the interviews took place, and then you asked a question. So I wonder actually, because I don't know if a lot of people here have seen that show at the AGO. So perhaps Ed, you could introduce just a little bit like about.
That's another talk. But,
yes, but also share a link for everyone who's interested
sure.
In the chat about
okay,
that.
so I'll just give you a quick summary of it. So in 2014, I was invited by independent curator Catherine Sicot to work on a project in San Agustin, which is a small suburb of Havana. And through various reasons, I went to her and I said I would do it on the condition that it would be about time. It would be with a small group of elders, and she was able to find this for me. So it began. I you know, like earlier on, I said I like to be like playful and childlike, And that was the case going into Cuba with this project, because I felt I was completely naive. I'm not a documentary artist. I'm not a videographer, but I went there with my small camera with really bad sound equipment. And literally, I wanted to explore the idea of time over time, and that the condition is the people who work with me will continue on with this project until either they die or I die or when they lose interest. Because one of the reasons I want to do this is that I didn't want to be a visiting, like tourist artist, where I go there for a project and I leave. I wanted to sustain this in a deep and meaningful way that makes sense for both sides, for the elders and for myself. So the project started in 2014 and it continues, even though there's a show on right now in the form of videos, photographs, and installation. I'm actually going back next Sunday, October the 16th, and I'll be staying there on and off till December the 9th to continue my project, because over time, I'm interested in what the elders think about time. They're all people from before the revolution, so they side with Fidel. They're all Fidelists. They love him like their own father, and I'm interested in what they say about time, but I'm also interested in how time impacts them and what they do in the time that they have left. Because for some people, they're older, so time seems less. Although life is fickle, we can never predict who's going to outlive the other person. In my project, the oldest 104-year-old, Anna, passed away first. She fell, so she broke her hip, and that really accelerated her decline. And the second to go was Eva. Eva was the youngest. She was 67 in the time. So I'm saying how fickle life is, how unpredictable life and death is. So the idea is to really embrace every moment, to celebrate every moment, to really hold on and cherish and participate, to share, and to, I would just say, celebrate life as it is. And so the furniture installation that's in the show is inspired by two sources. One is when I was researching into the representation of trauma, I went to places like Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Santiago, Chile. I went to Nanjing. I went to the Cambodia, to the killing fields. I was interested in how history, the authorities, how they recount history, how they present the history in such a way that they want you to see it in through their eyes. So there was one place in Santiago, Chile that really inspired me, because unlike the other places where they had photographs and artifacts and videos and films showing you, and text, lots of text, showing you what they suffer through. In London 38, that's the name of the house, Londres 38, the place was literally empty. They took away everything except for a few furnitures. I didn't know where to put them, so they piled them up. And it was really spooky, because when they took away the frameworks on the wall, you can see the residuals based on the smoking of people in the past. And so everything was ghostly, everything was haunted. I felt the history was very present in that space. So they vacated everything, but they left text on the walls. Things like "never again," or if you don't remember the past, it will repeat in the present. Really powerful words to not to blame and not to point fingers, not to victimize themselves again, but to suggest that we need to be mindful. Otherwise, things will repeat themselves. In the same way, when I was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the people who had suffered through the bombings didn't call themselves victims. They only say that we suffer through this and we work and fight to see that it will never happen to other people, because it was so terrible. Unlike some places where they say, oh, we're victims and look how we suffered. China was one big one. I just resented their presentation. In fact, that they were actually in the Nanjing Massacre Museum, they actually had real people, like real bodies still there, exposed in the museum on the site where they were killed. So in a way, if you think about Chen Jieren, he's a Taiwanese artist. He talks about how when you represent someone and they died, in a way they've died twice. So the first is the loss, the loss. So the first is their mortal death, and the second is the death of their agency. That their image, in this case in Nanjing, their actual bodies are being circulated over and over again without their control of it. So so in London 38, I use a text in other places as a future perfect, meaning that in Santiago, in Chile, the history is now a thing of the past. The events are a thing of the past. They put these words up to suggest that we should not have these things repeated. So it's already passed. But in certain circumstances, like our indigenous women and girls that are missing or murdered, it's still a present. So for an exhibition, I put these words up to suggest that it was a thing of the past, but it's also a question why it hasn't already been a present, why things are still happening in this very moment. So when I'm researching and doing other works, there's always a crossover. And I find that really rewarding to be able to learn from one project and use it in a different project.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's and I got to see a show, and it was really immersive installation, and then got to spend, you really have to spend time and then to look at the objects, and also there was a video, and yeah, really have to take time and then to get a better sense of this kind of process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, the second reason I use the furniture is because one of my elders, Sonia, we did an object exchange as a project, and she told me that all her belongings, when she dies, will go to her niece, and she told the niece this, and the niece said all these things, including furniture from her grandparents, mean nothing to her, that she would sell them when Sonia dies. And Sonia had decided that within her lifetime, she would give all her belongings away to people she like, and that even though the objects have no value per se, they have, you know, these other qualities that is endearing to her. So she preferred to give them away, that rather than giving them to her niece. And I felt that the furniture speaks of the fact that all the furniture in the NGO show once was owned by someone, they had meaning, and over time they lost that meaning. So I created this very domestic realm. At the same time, because of the way I placed the furniture, they become topsy-turvy. So there's a sense of disorientation and a sense of I would say an uncanny, because simultaneously you see them as furniture, but they also become something else.
So if you find yourself in Toronto, check out the show. Someone said, beautiful, hope to see it.
It's on for years, so I'm very lucky.
And yeah, and really have to take some time with the work. There's so much more than just the more sculptural presentation, and there's a lot of there are objects within the installation, and yeah. So we do have like 2 more questions, and one of the question is that who have been your recent influences from the contemporary art world? I think Ed sort of introduced a little bit earlier in the presentation, but it's up to you. If yeah.
I think my influences are ongoing, and some are more conscious and some are more unconscious. I can't really say more recently because I've seen a lot of shows, but because my own momentum is so strong that I feel I don't need to say, oh, I'm going to steal this or that from other people. When I was teaching, I would say to my students, you know, this is a moment where you can steal, beg, and borrow, because you're in a class situation, you see what other people are doing. I just feel my own projects have their own liveliness and they go forward. So like my Nestor, my Cuban editor who's staying with me right now, he showed me an installation by a German artist using furniture, and I've never seen it, but it doesn't faze me saying, oh, someone else has used furniture, because I feel there are probably a lot of artists who have used furniture in their work, but everyone uses them in a very different way. So I in the past, so people that I really loved in the past when I was younger, I would say Nancy Spiro, um, Betty Goodwin. I love Pennoni, and I also still really like Elijah Clark's work because of her sculptural qualities and the way the sculptures are embodied in the performative, in the physical realm of the person. And her sculptures are, some of them are also infinitely variable. She made them so that they can be moved and arranged and rearranged. I find her work very poetic and very powerful. I think I like things that are poetic. Sometimes things that are too overtly political can be really dry and feel like they're very preachy. I never want to be preachy in my work, and I would like, as an artist, to seduce the viewer so that they want to look at the work, and then maybe the content will come out. So it's about creating texts that contextualize the work, not texts that kind of explain the work away.
Thank you so much. The final question is, water versus people, are there parallels in their collaborations with you?
Well, yes, definitely. And maybe it was stated in my initial intro on finding words that describe both humans and water, using adjectives and thinking about personalities and traits and conditions. And again, I just feel, okay, people are entities. They're out there. They're separated from me. I may be very close to certain people, but they're still separated from me. But water is around me and it's within me. It can never be fully separated from me. And even this morning, I was thinking how when you're younger, your body is filled with more water. It's like 75% water. And when you're older, it's like 50%. And I was thinking this morning as I looked at my wrinkles, and I said, wow, water is saying its long goodbye to me. You know, like I'm trying out and I'll die, and then it will kind of leave me completely. I'm not saying that in a morbid way, just thinking about it. No sorrow, no sadness, just a passing thought.
Well, thank you thank you to everyone for the questions, and also to Ed for answering them. And I think that I think that there is so much to think about, and in terms of our relationship with like a natural force, and also but also time, and then I do want to welcome everybody to come see the show at Center A. It's on till the 12th of on the 12th of November, so it's going to be a while, and we will share some of the documentation of the show on social media. So and we do some highlights of the works as well. So if you cannot make it here physically, like in person, then you'll be able to see some of the images. And also on our website, there are descriptions of the artworks, and also like a pamphlet kind of format. So you're welcome to read through those as well. If there are no other questions, and I would just like to thank everybody again for coming to the talk.
Thank you so much.
And then
Very long. Sorry about that.
no, I think that it's
I need to stick
like
to
I said, Ed has always been so generous in sharing and also to talk about his work and the practice and how that's situated. So I'm really grateful to be hosting this talk, and then also thank you, Ed, for making time to do this online program, because I know you're extremely busy. You are like one of the most energetic persons I've ever met, and so prolific. And I hope to see your other shows soon.
Thank you, Henry. And thank you everyone for attending and staying till the end.